Calculus is standards-based. A lot of our history courses are standards-based, and science and biology is standards-based. So if you have a freshman right now, they probably have 3 or 4 standards-based classes. Hitting on the why again is it's going back to we want to know what students know on that discrete knowledge base. So most of our, and I'm jumping ahead a little bit here, most of our classes have critical standards and they have substandards. So what we're measuring are these critical standards. And all of this information that you're seeing tonight is online, and I'll be providing you with that website via email after today. So if you're the kind of person like I am and need to write stuff down, feel free to do it. But if you don't want to write anything down, everything will be available. So you can just sit back and listen if you'd like. So what are grades based on? They're based on their specific learning tasks. Objectives rather than task completion. We want to focus on what students know rather than what they do. Now, some of this is a little different. If you think of our fine arts program, an art class, a gym class, those are all actual performance-based classes, right? You actually have to do something to show your knowledge base on that. What we're looking at in our core classes, the academic side, is what is your knowledge base? What can you prove knowledge is? We talk a lot about that. What is your proof of learning? And we look at that, and what we try to do is and this isn't across the board yet, so let me be clear on that. What we try to do is if you don't get it the first time, we try to give you a different way to prove knowledge is what I would say. Some of our classes, our history classes, are much further along in that. Our English classes also have a great opportunity for kids to prove knowledge in some different ways. Some of our classes are still traditional, very traditional, like I was in school. Our math classes are a lot of multiple choice, true and false, fill in the blank, right? That's just the nature of where they're at right now. But it's a great opportunity for us to have that chance to differentiate that learning. Because ultimately, I prove knowledge in different ways, right? Depends on the task that I'm doing, it depends on the area that I'm in. I'm not a really strong reader, so for me, I don't learn that way, and I know I don't learn that way. So when I went to college, for example, I would go up to a professor and say, do you test off of your lecture, do you test out of your textbook? If they said they tested out of their textbook, I dropped the class and went down to the next professor until they said I'd go out of my lecture, because I know me. And so I said, that's what I need. On a side note, between my regular courses and my summer school courses, I only missed 2 class periods my whole 4 years of college, because I knew if I missed that class period, I was going to be at a loss, because unless someone could have a conversation with me, it didn't work for me. And what standards-based is, it gives a lot of people those choices to prove that knowledge differently. I'll talk about a few teachers specifically. Mr. Boyd, for example, if you had him for one of your social studies courses, yes, there's true and false multiple choice questions that he gives, but if you're not being successful that way, he's more than willing, after you do your remediation, to come in and talk with you about it. And he'll have a conversation. And through that conversation, he'll evaluate what your knowledge base is. Well, for a lot of our kids, that's a great way to prove knowledge, right? And who can't have a rich conversation? Because if you don't know what you're talking about, after 30 seconds, I know it, right? Well, if you're going to have a 5-minute conversation with me, you have to know what you're talking about. That's an advantage of what we have in the standard space. We have 2 different kinds of standards. We have what we call a critical standard. And a critical standard is what students must know and demonstrate before they end the class. Generally, there's 4 to 20 critical standards per semester. So this is the trickiest part of standards-based. And I will be very honest that as a parent looking on Power School, if you did that in one of our standards-based classes, this was probably the hardest thing to figure out. And I'll own that. What I did is I gave teachers a lot of freedom to try a lot of different ways. And then now this semester, everyone's doing it the same way of demonstrating whether kids knew their critical standards or whether they don't know their critical standards. So this coming semester, at the very bottom of any Power School, anyone not in Power School, not know how to get into it? Okay, excellent, good. So if you go to Power School and your student's in a standards-based class, if you click on the gradebook part of it, at the very bottom of that gradebook are going to be all of the critical standards listed, and it will say whether they've met the critical standard or whether they haven't met the critical standard. That was the #1 most confusing thing for everybody, including myself, so we've solved that problem for second semester. And again, we were intentional by trying a couple different ways to prove that, and this was the best way moving forward for us to make sure that you know what your child knows and doesn't know. Now, the reason why they're called critical standards is because if you don't have all of the critical standards met, you will not pass the class at the end of the semester. Now that sounds tough, right? It sounds like, okay, there's 12 things you have to know. I only know 11. I don't pass the class. How's that fair? Okay, and I get that. When I was teaching, I did what at that time was called mastery-based learning or outcome-based education. It's all kind of the same thing. The way that I view this and the way that our teachers view it is it's because it's not one and done. Okay, so let's reverse it. Let's say you're in a traditional course, you take your test, you get your 75% on it, you're done. That's it, have a good day. That's the best you're gonna get. Or you're like me, and in my English course, I took my test the first time and got a 52% on it. Okay, that's your final grade on that test. You're moving on. With critical standards, if you don't meet what we're calling the proficiency level, which for a lot of classes is around the 60% level, then we give you a chance to retake that. And you can continue to try to prove knowledge on it until you actually can prove to us that you know that critical standard. Now, why is that important, right? Honestly, in the grand scheme of life, whether you know the Pythagorean theorem or not, probably isn't going to determine your success in the future, right? I'll own that, and I can appreciate that. But what it does do is it narrows your focus down to what you need to know to be successful at that next level of class. So for example, in our 9th grade English class, we have a total of 16 critical standards that they meet throughout the year. If you don't meet one of those critical standards, you're going to be at a spot where when you go to 10th grade English, you'll have a hole in your learning that will put you at a disadvantage from everybody else. So if we go back to when I was in high school, I received my C- in English, right? I got moved on to 10th grade English. Well, that C- meant I didn't get 25% of that class. But when I went to 10th grade, they expected me to come with a full knowledge base, right? That was the expectation, which is a fair expectation. I passed the class. But I passed the class not knowing 25% of what I needed to know. Then in 10th grade, I got I think a C+. Well, now I go to 11th grade, so now I'm even further behind than where I could have been. What standards-based says is that when you get that standard, when you've achieved that critical standard, we believe at that point in time, right, because we're not testing you over and over and over again, but for that point in time, you have the knowledge base that you're going to have to be successful at the next class. And that's why that's important, because we're filling what we call holes of knowledge. And if you have a hole and we don't fill that, then you're going to be at a disadvantage as you move forward. Not only in your next class, but also on this little thing called the ACT, right? And for those of you that haven't had 11th graders yet, buckle up for that year, because that's a lot of stress and pressure for an 11th grade student to be under nowadays. I was talking with a parent a second ago that when I was in high school, the grade point and the ACT score that I had got me into Central Michigan University. Loved it, great choice, enjoyed my 4 years there. If I had that same grade point and that same ACT score now, they would reject me. Okay? It's a different world that we're living in. It's much more competitive to get into college. And part of my job is to make sure when you leave this institution, you have a choice of universities or you have a choice of world of work that you want to go into. Well, it's important that we give you a complete knowledge base so when you get to that point, you have the knowledge that you need. Again, my example, if I have a C-, nobody really knows the part that I don't know. And that's why we have the critical standards. The substandards are things that we want you to know. Okay, they're still important, and we still measure them. But if you don't get a substandard, you'll still pass the class, assuming everything adds up right and you get the grade that's a passing grade. The easy way I remember it is critical standards are what you have to know. Substandards are what we want you to know. Okay, two different things. I taught business class here. Not here, in my lifetime I taught business. I thought it was really important when I taught the economics part of it, supply and demand, that you knew what the equilibrium point was. I'm not 100% sure that it was that important for you to know price elasticity. Okay, so for me, equilibrium point would have been a critical standard. You would have had to prove knowledge on that. Price elasticity would have been a substandard that I might have given you a quiz on, right? You might have seen it on a test. I might have given you a homework assignment to go with it. Maybe even did a presentation on it. But if you didn't get that 100% right, or that 60% proficiency level that we're looking for, I would have given you your points and we would have continued on. Because I didn't think that that was critical for you to know to be successful in the next class or successful on the ACT from my perspective as a teacher. So again, critical standards are what we believe you have to know. Substandards are what we want you to know. We still assign points, still measure them. What does SBL look like? And this is not a full list, but what could it look like? It's a framework. It could be project-based. It is proficiency-based learning. There's still lecture involved in it. There's still inquiry-based. There's still labs in it. There's still cooperative learning. You don't have to change your teaching style at all and do standards-based learning. What you do have to do is give the opportunity to continue to prove knowledge on those critical standards, though. And that's a big shift for us. And I can tell you, speaking with the staff that's doing it, they will say, and if you've talked to any of the teachers doing it, I bet they shared this with you, they would say that they've never worked harder in their life than they worked this year with standards-based grading and standards-based learning, because you have to track all of this information, and you have to make sure that your students know it or have a chance to continue to prove the knowledge on it. That's the big difference, okay? But you can still do your lecture if you want to. You can still do a PowerPoint. You can still do a Blogster. There's 100 different ways you can do it. That doesn't change. What does change, though, is that the teachers will also tell you that for the first time they really feel that they know what your child knows and doesn't know. And that's critical. That is very important as we move forward as educators. Obviously, we want your child to know everything right in our subject area. Because at the high school level, we love our subject area. That's why a lot of us went into teaching, is we love our content, and we really want to share that with somebody. And that somebody, in this case, would be the students that come in every day to see us. It's important for us to know, though, what you know and what you don't know. This gives us that opportunity, but you can still do all the fun stuff that you've always done as a teacher. What it doesn't look like. It doesn't mean that kids just show up and work independently and we say good luck. Right? That's not a part of what we do. It has nothing to do with standards-based learning. We don't do that. It doesn't mean there's just one methodology, one way of doing it. Now, there are some commonalities that we have now, right? As I talked about in Power School, we're all reporting that the same way. When it comes to proficiency level within a PLC, for example, all Algebra 1 teachers have the same level of proficiency that kids have to meet. So there are things that you have to do, but as far as how you're going to teach it, it's still up to those teachers and their individual styles to do that. One size fits all with all teaching, just talked about that. And then a process that will solve all of our problems. It's not perfect, right? Just like the old system we had wasn't perfect either. We surveyed a number of our students, and I just had a chance to read it. It was Mr. Socia surveyed all of his students, and about 38% of them came back with one answer, which I thought was interesting. It was, I like standard-based learning because if I had a bad day, I could still redo it and get a better grade. And I've had those bad days, right? And maybe you've had the same bad days that you didn't get sleep the night before, you woke up, you got into a fight with somebody, maybe you're not feeling well, you go in, you take your test, your score is your score. In this situation, that's not your final score unless you've met that proficiency level, right? If you've hit the proficiency level, usually you don't make it up after that. You take that grade and you move on. But if you don't hit that proficiency level, you have the opportunity to try again to prove that knowledge, which is the key part of this, is you continue to try to prove that knowledge. The advantage of it is it focuses on student results and their growth. If you're in any of the English classes, the growth model is key. They expect you that if you get a 6 out of 10 on the first time, by the time you're taking it again, you're moved up to a 7 out of 10. This mirrors 100% of what the ACT is looking for in that growth model, especially in the writing. Students have many opportunities to prove what they learn. Reassessment can occur in many different forms. We touched on that at the very beginning. And students own their learning. They're owning this process of tracking what they have accomplished and what they haven't accomplished. And then they can come in and ask for assistance either during seminar or to make an appointment with their teacher before or after school. So it's important as we look at this that this just isn't a style for the teachers to take on. It's also a change for the students, right? But the interesting thing is that change it only occurred for 2 years. And let me back through this for a second. Standards-based learning didn't start at the concept at the high school level. Standards-based learning started at the elementary level. And if you have an elementary student now, you know exactly what I'm talking about. They get all the time the report cards are talking about, do they know this content? What is their reading level? What is their math level? Right? That's what you get. That's what I get with my elementary student. All that is based on standards. The only years that they haven't had standards-based were the 2 years at the middle school, because the middle school was transitioning for a traditional high school model, right? And that made sense. Now we're actually, I always say, going back to the elementary model of saying that if you're not at the right grade level, then we're going to provide additional support to get you there. Because that's our job. Our job isn't just to say, here it is, take it or leave it, that's all we have. Our job is to help you fill in those holes prepare you for that next level, and to make sure that you're at the level of which you need to be successful. So again, standards-based didn't start at the high school. It really started at the elementary level. So that's the end of the formal presentation. Before I entertain some questions, I want to talk about what are some next steps. Because some of you might be here because one of your child may have failed one or more of the standards-based classes. This is a great part of standards-based, is that many students who failed the standards-based class will have an opportunity this month, and this month only, to come in after school and remake that one or two critical standards that they didn't pass and still get credit and a grade in the class. So let's think about what happened last year at this time. Last year at this time, if you failed biology, you got an F in biology A, you went on to biology B. Now remember, you failed, so you don't know at least 50% of the material. You go on to biology B, and then you take biology B, you get whatever grade you get there, let's hope you pass it, and now you come back your sophomore year. And what do? We put you into biology A your sophomore year. So now we take an elective choice away from you, and now we're putting you back in with freshmen, or we put you in our credit recovery course. Those are the only two choices, or you could have done summer school. Those are the only three choices we had. Now we have a choice that for this month, and none of you know this yet, and the students really don't know this yet either, because I want a chance to talk with everybody about this first. But in the email that you'll be receiving, it'll outline how you go through this process of having your child come in this month to get the additional help. This month they have a chance to come in to work with, and I'll use biology as an example, one of our biology teachers to help them remake those standards so that they can still pass that class and not have to do the repeat. And remember, when they repeated it before, like last year we were talking about, when they repeated it, they repeated the whole class. So even if the 50% didn't represent all of the critical stuff, you still had to repeat the entire class all over again. Now, you only have to focus on, hopefully, the one or two standards. Right now, if you missed 10 of the 12 standards, I'm not sure February is going to be enough time for you. I'll be honest with that. You might end up having to take a credit recovery or to repeat the course, because that's a lot. But if you're talking one or two standards, we have a system in place, and I'll be emailing out, again, the instructions on how to take advantage of this, and also the calendar that goes with it, because they don't meet every day. There's certain days that you can come in to do this. And we're giving the child the chance to get credit before it's too late. Right? And that's really the point of standards-based learning, is that it's that next step towards meeting learning at the pace of the child. Because right now, right, and when we went to school, the learning was fixed. The learning was variable and the time was fixed, right? You had a semester. That's all you had to prove your learning was one semester. If you didn't get it in the semester, I'm sorry, that's what it was. What we're switching to now is where the time is your variable and your learning is fixed. So we want to make sure that you learn it, and we'll extend that time if you need it. That's what we're going to do this month, is extend that time for the kids that need those standards to make those up and to still get, in this case, they'll still even get the grade in the class. So it won't just switch to credit. They can get the grade once it's recalculated back into it. Now, let me be clear, though, that if your kid passed the standard, they don't get to remake that, right? We're not into grade improvement. We're into passing the critical standards only. So once you pass the critical standards, that's your grade. And that's pretty fair to me, right? Because if I decide to apply myself and have an A right now, I shouldn't be in the same situation as someone who didn't apply themselves and they have to go back through and they need to remake that stuff. That's important they have that opportunity, but we want to make sure that it's a level playing field moving forward. So what we've done is we've given that time extension for the students for those critical standards that need to remake it. And what the staff has done is they provided me with a list of names of students who failed, and on that list they have the kids that can still pass the class, and they have students that just they can't pass the class. They just didn't learn enough. When they took into account the substandards that we talked a second ago, we still measure those. And so for anyone that has a chance to still pass a class, this week I'm putting letters in the mail to you saying, here's what you can do, here's the process to use, this is a class you can still pass, here's a great opportunity for you. For the other half, it's not quite half, but for the other students that don't have that opportunity, we'll follow our normal credit recovery process that we have with them. So this is our next step into really extending that time and focusing on what is the learning, because ultimately that's what we want to know, right? What is the knowledge base that the student has? And so that information, as I said, will be coming out not only via email from me, but also in a letter from me if they have the opportunity to make up that class and to pass those critical standards. That's what I have for today. So I'm hoping that I answered a lot of your questions. But at this point, if anyone has a specific question or a general question, I'm happy to take it from the audience. Yes, sir.
Shall each student know what he or she has to make up in terms of the critical standards?
I'm going to repeat the question, and I should have said this at the beginning, I apologize. We're videoing this so that this can be up for people that didn't make it here. If I didn't say that, I apologize. We will be, in my letter, it'll say the critical standards, and we won't, honestly, I don't understand what they mean, and you don't understand what they mean, because it's going to say critical standard 1, 3.9, 4.2, doesn't mean anything to me. But when they go into Mrs. Tieman's back there, Mrs. Tiemann as a biology teacher, she's going to look at that sheet, and they'll already know the people that have signed up for this, and they'll know the standards that they have to remake. Yep, in the letter that I give you, I'm going to put in the letter that what the teachers turned into me was they need these 3 standards to make up. So I'll be giving that in that letter. Now, honestly, if he doesn't know what those are, there's a bigger problem, right? Because he should know, because he's been in the class for a semester. But even if he doesn't, worst case scenario, he can still come in and the teacher will walk him through that process. Again, the more standards you have to make up, it decreases the odds that you're going to get it done in February. I'm going to be honest with you, because we only have so many days to get all these students back in here to try to make it up. If you're talking 1, 2, or 3 standards, shouldn't be a problem. We can't reteach the whole class in 4 hours after school. Okay, we just can't do that. So know that that could be a variable with that. But yes, in the letter I give you, it'll delineate that for you. Okay? Yes, ma'am. And I'll come to you, sir. Okay?
I have 2 students here as juniors, and I don't see that they have had a really hard time switching over into the standard-based learning in their junior year. Added stress, it's already stressful being a junior anyway, and the style of learning is changed completely. I'm having to hear that they can make up a couple of them missed. What's the preparation for that? Because I also saw in a video somebody that says that the child has to own their own learning, which traditionally we were taught the things that we know and we were tested to make sure that we understood them. This seems to me that you were tested to see what you don't know.
Okay, let me see if I can. I heard one big question there, so let me see if I can work this through, and then you'll help me as I go through it, okay? In my opinion, and let me explain the owning your own learning part, and that is that you need to be involved in the process. You can't be a passive receiver of information anymore. That's not the world that we live in, and if we're preparing you for that world, we're not doing a very good job at that. So I look back at my high school experience, and a lot of it, and maybe the same was for you, sit there, take notes, and then 3 or 4 or 5, a week later, we're going to give you multiple choice tests, regurgitate the information, and if you score high enough, then you're good to go, right? That's not the world that your son or daughter, I'm not sure which, I apologize.
There are 2 boys.
2 boys, okay, yeah.
But to wait till your junior year I don't see the advantage for my 2 sons and juniors. It's been very.
Is this an English class? Or,
We have English,
okay.
we have math, and we have 3 standard-based learning.
and I'll tell you the biggest advantage is that your sons will be more prepared for the ACT than they would have been. That's the biggest advantage because we know exactly what they know and don't know. And the critical standards are tied directly into, I'll say, the majority of what the ACT is going to test on in that one subject area, Algebra 2 in this case, I'd imagine, correct? Where before, again, if your son would have gotten a 70%, would have gotten a C and would have moved on, right? No doubt about it. But what if that 30% was 60% of the ACT? Now he doesn't know any of that 60%. And there's no doubt, it's hard. I'll admit with you, and I'll own this right now, the hardest change has been for the junior class. No doubt about that. Next year, we're not going to have the same problem because they would have had it generally for 2 years, and some for 3 years. We made a very critical choice to do that based on the ACT and our ACT scores, knowing that that is the #1 factor of going to college. And so leaving your child with just failing the critical standards and not having an option, that wasn't fair. So we still have that option. It's not the best, right? I'll own that too. But in my opinion, it's way better than the 70%. Because now, when he comes back in to get that, and it might only be, let's say, 2 standards just to make my life easy, to prove knowledge on those 2 standards. 1, we're focusing just on those 2, which is helpful, rather than focusing on what it could have been a whole semester's worth of knowledge. And 2, especially now, learning it now in February with the ACT coming up in March, it's a great review opportunity also. It's not a perfect system, that's true. And again, it'll get easier as we go forward with it. And it is new, and we knew that going into it. But we really wanted to make sure that those holes were filled. And I'd much rather have a student spend a little bit of extra time after school getting those holes filled than not, and then not being prepared for that test. Now, let me be clear, we're never going to teach to a test, right? We don't do that. Our curriculum is aligned with it for sure. And there are much more important things in life than your ACT score. I believe that 100%. But I know that my job, that ACT score is critical because without that score, you only have one choice when you leave here. And I'm not comfortable with that. And if we're not going to agree, and I'm not saying you, I'm saying everybody now, if we're not going to agree on that, then we're just not going to agree. Because I believe that in my heart, that everybody, my job is to make sure everyone, and it doesn't happen, but I would love it, everyone scores a 21 or higher. Because if you don't hit that 21 mark, your choices are extremely limited. And you can't score a 21 if you don't pass our critical standards. It's not possible. Now, let me be fair and disclose. If you pass all of our critical standards, you still might not score a 21, right? Let me be clear, this isn't a guarantee. Don't come to me and say, but it increases the odds dramatically. But you're right, it does add a lot of stress to that year. And we thought very critically about that. I felt that we had good supports in place. I think that we have a good system in place for February to give the best opportunity.
The second part of
Okay.
this is what's the preparation for the past instead of based out? Are they getting some study guides? Are they using two or just testing to see if you can pass the second time?
When they come in to get remediation for first semester stuff? Okay, just wanted to make sure I understood. Thank you. What they'll come in is they'll first meet with the teacher, and the teacher will have a conversation with them to see where they're at on it. They might, because some of our students just, I'll use a very open statement, just blew it off, right? They blew one standard off, that's all it was. They can come in and prove knowledge right then, right? And so I don't want to make you do extra work if you don't have to. So after they have that conversation, or they might give a study guide to start with to see where you're at on that, and then they'll provide additional support. Again, the more time that we have to take to do that, the less time there will be to make up that standard eventually to do that assessment. So it's going to be a balance between the two, and I'm going to ask for a little bit of understanding as we go through it, because this is our first time at this level of doing it. But my commitment to you is that if you're not happy with the process, all you do is click on the Fraser homepage, click on me and send me an email, I'll call you and we'll have a conversation about how I can make it better. Because ultimately, if this isn't going to make things better, we shouldn't be doing it. Right? Because we've committed a lot of time and resources and a lot of energy for a better product. And if we're not getting a better product, then I'm not going to do it anymore, because it's not worth it. I think right now, this is what I know for sure, is that we're turning out a better product than what we did last year, because we know exactly what kids know and what they don't know. And if you don't know, it goes back to a loose analogy would be going 100 years ago to the doctor and saying, it hurts right here. Now we go to the doctor, they can do a full CAT scan, they know exactly, or MRI, and they know exactly where the problem is, right? That's similar to what we get with the critical standards and measuring those critical standards, is we can, again, fill those holes of knowledge. Does that help with the second question at all? Because if not, call me out. No, if you're not happy, you can, we might disagree philosophically, but I just want to make sure I answered your question.
Ask my question.
Okay.
Is you said one time, pass this one time, they can pass it, so they take it. Well, is that fair to the student?
Well, it's a fairer system than what, certainly it will, again, depending on the number of standards. And again, if it's 5 or more, you're going to be in a tough spot, right? If it's 1 or 2, I'm very confident we can get that done in the month of February. Again, I commit to you that if you see this not working out well, let me know and we'll figure out a different way. Because ultimately, and this is going to sound, I guess, bad, I don't really care whether a student passes or fails a class if they don't know the information. I want them to know the information. I want them to earn that grade. I want to provide the system where they can do that. That's my job. And so if I'm not doing that, you need to let me know, and I'll work with you to try to provide a different system. It won't be perfect, but we'll work together. Yes, sir. Yeah.
Is there a limit, like, during the quarter or semester, how many times they try to meet that critical standard? And like, what do all the other kids do in the classroom? Like, people will try to take that critical standard over and like.
Two good questions. The first question was, is there a limit of how many times you can be reassessed? The general answer for that is no. You can continue to reassess, but oftentimes between reassessments, there's additional work you have to do as a student to try to learn that information either differently or to shore up those areas that you don't know already. Because it wouldn't make any sense if you came in, I handed you, let's say, a 10-point true and false question test, you got 1 out of 10, I said, okay, here's the next one. It's not supposed to be random luck that gets you the points. Now, we're still working on a few parts of that, but in general, that's the concept to it, is that you can continue to reassess. Now, we've drawn the line in February, so after the end of February, whatever your grade is what your grade is, because I just can't extend it any more than that. So there is a point at which your reassessments will end. Okay? Now, what are kids doing in the class? That varies class to class. In some of our biology classes, they're a little bit more open-ended, so there's a lot more freedom for the kids to work in small groups and independently, and so there can be those one-on-one conversations. Oftentimes, students are coming in during seminar, so it's not during class time. And then the English department did one night a month, where they could come after school and they could do a reassessment at that point. So it's not taking that much class time away compared to what we've had in the past of trying to help a student out one-on-one that you may have done under a traditional setting. Okay, go ahead.
My second question was, is there like a weighted average of critical standards, substandards, and homework? Or is homework just...
Sure. And that would depend on, and that depends on what we call the PLC or the class that you're in. So all Algebra 1 classes weight the same way that you're talking about. Now, some might do total points, which is what I always did as a teacher because it was easier for me to calculate total points. Quizzes were 100, homework was 10, right? And so I just added it up and that's what it was. But how Algebra 1 does it is a little different than how English 9 does it, okay? But all English 9 does it the same way. So you'd have to look at the syllabus to see specifically what that looks like. By the end of this year, all departments will be doing it the same way as a department. So all the math department will be, using your terms, weighting the same way. We've always had that though in high school, that it's been a class level decision how they wanted to weight their grades, whether it's traditional or whether it was standards based. The only thing that's universal again is that you have to pass all of your critical standards. That's universal in any standards-based class that you have. Okay? Yes, ma'am.
My question is about the grades, and I came here tonight with that question in my head of, will they still then be giving letter grades, or is it really going to be backed by the elementary school, the checklist? And my understanding is that they'll be getting letter grades
Correct.
in addition with the little checklist.
The checklist might be more of what the student's keeping track of, or it might be shown on PowerSchool as a check, but we always, unless there's some great change in the collegiate world, we will always be giving letter grades because colleges don't appreciate the standards concept, which is fine, they don't have to, but we have to adapt to them. So they will always get a letter grade. We have a few courses that are credit, no credit, but other than that, and their standard base had nothing to do with that.
And as a parent of a junior who is very concerned with the GPA and everything like that, what is then going to show the difference between my child's A and some other child's A who took 3 times to get it there?
Sure. It's and that's a fair question. And for right now, because this is the first time we've done this month-long remediation, and I didn't think it would be fair to change the game right in the middle of it. So in this case,
That's our juniors this year.
not when it came to grading. No, I didn't. No, they could still earn the letter grade whether they got the grade in January 17th or whether they get it in February 17th. They could still get that A, because that is important right now. In the future, it may be that if you don't meet it by the semester deadline, you just get credit or no credit after that. That would be an option moving forward. I didn't think it would be fair to say to you tonight, that's what we're doing, right? I thought that isn't the right thing to do, so we didn't do that. I'll tell you, though, that the odds are pretty low that somebody who has critical standards that they need to remake is going to end up getting an A in the class. Because, and maybe, let me be clear on this point, just because you pass all your critical standards doesn't mean you get an A in the class. Because you could have passed your critical standard at an 82%, right? Well, that's still factored in, back to your question, in your total grade. What it just means is that if you didn't pass a critical standard, you don't pass the class. So for this time, you're correct. We're looking at it as a staff to say, at the end of second semester, what's that going to look like? Will it be the same way that you just earned the grade and that's what it is? Or do we switch to that if you earned it on our time schedule, you get the grade, after that it's credit, no credit. I see the benefits of both, right? So I hear where you're coming from. At the same time, I mean, I know for me, it took me a little bit longer to learn a 5-paragraph essay than it did my friend. It doesn't mean I didn't write it just as good as he did. It just took me longer to understand it. So there's a philosophical part of it too. That's probably a 2 or 3 year discussion though from now, not what we're going to be talking about this year and next year. But I appreciate that question. It's a good question. Any other questions that you might have for me? Yes, ma'am.
I'm sorry, this applies to language arts and math right
No, it applies to, and I'll just off the top of my head, biology and science has it. Our math of Algebra 1, Algebra 2, and our calculus classes have it. A number of our social studies classes have it. There's semester classes, so a lot of them have it. All of our English 9 through 11 has it. And I think I got the 4 cores tonight. Dennis course. I'm sorry? Economics was it? Yep, that's one of our social studies classes. Yep, for sure.
now? Okay, so basically, in the 4 classes, are you rolling this into the middle school then as well, because the kids are taking the algebra one there?
Sure. For the Algebra 1, it will roll down in the same way, and we're looking at that for next year as a 7th grader coming to the 8th grade. Whether the middle school decides to go completely standards-based as we're moving towards, that'll be a discussion they have to have as a staff and as a community. For us, it makes sense for the reasons I've talked about tonight, but although I'd like to say that the high school drives the district, right? It's up to each building to make that decision for themselves. Thank you for the question. Any other questions for tonight? Yes, sir.
You mentioned 60% right now in the school. Are you looking at completing even 100%, or is that possible?
I kind of go back to No Child Left Behind, that 100% of the kids that have to do this, this, or this. I don't think 100% is reasonable in every core area. If that was the case, I wouldn't have never passed high school. So I think we'll always be, and this is me speaking tonight, right, to you, always be somewhere between the 60 and 70s range of what proficiency looks like. I think 60 is a good starting point. I don't think that's where we want to end, though. I'll be honest with you there. But I want to make sure that as we increase rigor, we do it thoughtfully. Right? At the same time, I wouldn't have been in favor of having everyone at 85% to start with. I think we have to look at the bigger picture than that. But that's a great question. I appreciate you asking it. That no, it will never be 100% in all of your content areas, or in any content area, really, for that matter. Yes, ma'am. Yep, it is currently possible that if you passed all the critical standards, because we still measure the substandards, and we measure what you rate on the critical standards, that mathematically you could still fail the class. It's possible. It's relatively unlikely, but there are some students that are in that situation. I'm not sure that'll be the case moving forward, but for right now, that's the situation they're in. Yes, sir.
Is this program unique to Fraser, or are there other districts doing it?
Nope, there's a number of other districts doing it, and a number of districts coming to us to see how we're doing it. One of the people we brought in was Gary Abood from Grosse Pointe South, I believe, high school. If it was North, he's really going to be upset with me. Who ended up being Teacher of the Year for the state of Michigan. He's been doing it for a number of years in his science courses, and so he was a consultant that we brought in to help us with this. On the website that I'll be sending to you under the resources tab, you'll see a number of articles and also a number of other schools in the country that are doing it. There's Adams 50 out of Colorado, I believe, where it's the entire school district is doing it, which they have like 10 high schools and a bunch of middle schools, et cetera. So we're not the first people to do this now.
So is it a national trend?
I believe it will be a national trend, yes. The research that I do and the articles that I get sent, more and more this is the direction we're going, really honestly because of the testing that we're required to do with the students. Now, I would do this anyway, even if we didn't have testing, because I believe it in my core that this is the right way to go. But because of the testing, again, we can't have those holes in the knowledge base. Otherwise, it just really puts you in a bad situation. Thank you. Any other questions for me? Yep.
Are you guys using more, I think you should social and those survey test classes. What are your juniors, what are your students saying? How are they doing? How are they doing with change?
Yeah, now I can't say that I've spoken to every junior about it, right? Because that would be challenging. The surveys that we have done, and the English classes, I believe, did surveys at every level. I could be wrong, but I know they did it in 9th grade. Is that the students, more than 50%, wanted the system over a traditional system. Well, again, I'm just saying that for the surveys that we did that were formalized, that was the result. What I'll do is, if you shoot me an email, I'll email out my SBL teachers and see if they did any at the 11th grade, and I'll be happy to share those results with you. Because it's not for everybody. There's no doubt about it. There are some students that are going to be challenged under the system. I agree with you 100% on that. Just like there were students that were challenged under the traditional system too. I can't, and I would like to, but I can't make a system that's going to meet everyone's needs all the time. And I appreciate that if it's your child that isn't being overly successful, that hurts, right? I get that part. I have 3 kids. Some of them are successful in different topics and in different areas. What I, again, will commit to you, though, is to work with you through the process. Because we shouldn't put a system in place that becomes impossible, right? That's not fair to anybody. And so if it gets that level of impossibility, that's where I definitely need to be involved in it, along with any of our assistant principals or counselors should be involved to help through that process. That's our job. And that's why I come here every day, is that I want to help kids succeed. And that's why we went down this road, is because we think this is the best path to help kids succeed. Anything else?
Yeah.
Yes?
You know, did you say that the teachers already had a meeting with the student to let them know that they'd be eligible? Or is
No.
your letter is going to let us know?
I wanted to talk to the parents first about it. Our concern was, and I think this is a fair concern, if we would have announced in, let's say, January 8th, that you had all February to make up your stuff, everyone would have waited until February to make up their stuff.
I think there was a part you said that the student was going to talk in a meeting or something.
That'll be when they come in after school in February to do the remediation. Yep. So you'll know through the letter that you get from me that will say your child is qualified for this opportunity. Here's the standards they have to make up. Here's a process you have to use. Because you have to register them for this because we need to know how many students are coming in so we can staff properly. And we need to know what resources we have to have available to help. Yes.
Is this going to be like an email?
Yes. No, it'll be a mail to your home.
Okay.
Yep. I'll also be sending out an email with some resources for you. But the letter saying that Johnny has qualified will go directly to your home.
Okay.
Thank you very much for coming out tonight. I'll be here for a while longer. If you need to talk, I'm more than happy to talk. I really appreciate you coming out. Thank you very much.